Hi, everyone. I'm Haider, Director for Asia here in TELUS Health. TELUS Health is an organization that works globally on global EAP, one of the largest providers in the world doing that. But also, we have modernized our approach to supporting mental health with our digital wellbeing platform that is fully translated. Today, I have the pleasure and the privilege to be here to support all of you with this keynote, discussing on the Asia Mental Health Index. The Asia Mental Health Index is a study that TELUS Health have been doing for a few years now, since 2020 across the world. And we've done the latest Asia version here together with our partners, Aon. So to start this whole conversation, I want to go back to the root of the problem. What is the mental health problem? Looking at this particular slide, the World Health Organization has done a study pre-pandemic in 2019. They've yet since to do another one now or recent years, or that's something that I've come across. But the numbers back then were also really staggering, where we have about 301 million people in the world living in anxiety, 200 million people living with depression, and so on. The cost of productivity on the global economy with mental health conditions reaches about US $1 trillion each year. That is a staggering amount, and I've said that staggering 3 times because it is really alarming. So looking at where the prediction was back then, by 2030, this cost is expected to be $6 trillion. Now, looking specifically in Asia and where we are right now, what's driving the focus on the mental health conversation within businesses and HRs and so on, a few factors that we put together here. COVID being one of them. I remember back in 2020 when COVID happened, a lot of organizations were panicking because of the fact that they didn't have any particular support for the most part. But now, moving forward 3 years later, there are other factors also moving into place, still with COVID, but there's also been a lot of government organizations within the world and also here in Asia, especially where I'm based here in Singapore, where there has been a lot more community-based initiatives and resources where government realizes more that needs to be done to support the mental health of their people here in Asia. Cost becomes another factor. And also one of the challenges that we face in the world, and especially here in Asia, is the lack of information or data benchmarking within the region and a country level on workplace mental health. Now, with this uncertainty, how do we then deal with this issue? So with our partners, Aon, TELUS have decided to embark on this journey in this side of the world to try to provide that data that is sorely missing and required for a lot of you out there, HR leaders and business leaders, to support you. And with that, we've come together with the Mental Health Index. So the Mental Health Index is a survey or study that's been done, polling a sample of 13,000 working individuals across all the countries that you're seeing here, and covering 6 dimensions of psychological well-being, including the following. And it's a clinically backed study that is supported and validated by the GAT7, the PHQ-9, and so on. So the focus here really is purely on the working population in this region, rather than looking at the young ones, or the retired professionals, or people who are not working or not in the workforce in general. So that allows the data to be really used by a lot of our clients or companies who may be looking for such data in this side of the world. So what we've come together is the fact that the Mental Health Index overall has a score of 100, and we take an average, taking all the different segments around it. And this is the overall average for Asia, right? Now, on the score of 100, looking at like we're back to school, 80 to 100 is optimal. Whereby 50 to 79, depending on how we are, could be good back in our school days, but 50 to 79 is really strained in this category of the mental health index. And of course, 50 and below is when the situation is highly distressed for the working population across the countries. So in what we've studied here, and based on the polls that we've had, all of the countries in Asia that we've polled all sits in that strained environment. So they need help and there needs to be support to be done. Overall, the average is about a 62.4 score. Now, how does that look like when we compare to the rest of the regions, the rest of the world? about the same. Everywhere in the world, we are around that 60 plus mark. However, Asia sits second lowest at 62.4, ahead of only Europe at 60.7. Now, pretty alarming. And the fact that everyone in the world is, from what the surveys have done, sits in that distress level is really quite alarming as well. Now, taking that further and diving into what I would like to call emotional distraction on work productivity. So when stress hit, how do people react in the workforce? To put it as layman as possible, with different nuances, of course. Now, the scores here become a lot worse, unfortunately. The strain level, only 3 or 4 countries in the world sits over there, but majority of us here in Asia sits in the high distress level. And the average for Asia sits at 47.2 in that high distress level. Now, what does that mean, right? So everyone else in the world sits in that particular level of strain early on in that 60s range, which is pretty poor already. But the distraction that we're getting here in Asia is quite alarming and goes way below that 60. Now, if we use the same comparison to the rest of the world as well, for Asia, where everyone else still sits in the 60 over mark, Asia sits at 47.2. Now, I want us to all take a pause here because that is a big gap. Now, what can we infer from this? Speaking to the people within my team, from the research professionals and my colleagues and my partners in Aon who looked at the numbers quite closely, there's a few inferences that we can make here, or potential assumptions that we can make here, is the fact that where the stress level could be really high across the world or quite aligned, the reality is the Asian population are struggling and not as resilient as their counterparts and colleagues in the other parts of the world. This could mean that there's a higher stigma in this part of the world, which is maybe for some of us in this call, in this event, no surprise. But also at the same time, the structure within the organization, the communication about what sort of support there is, are there any particular support in society or in the workplace, can be questioned, right? And therefore that has a direct impact on top of stigma to the productivity of workers when there is an emotional distraction at work to productivity levels. Now, I'm not going to stand here today and go through every single data point. There's 56, 57 pages of data points to look at. But here are some of the key findings that we have. And throughout this key finding, again, I'm not going to dive into everything else, but I'm going to talk about the three slightly left to the middle, right? Burnout, productivity, and stigma. In the Asian Mental Health Index, what we found is that 47% of the people being surveyed feels mentally and or physically exhausted at the end of the workday. Now, let's take a moment right there, right? Imagine your day so far this week, or maybe last week, whereby you, your partners, your loved ones, your friends and family, when you get together over the weekends to, complaining or talking about work, have you had that feeling, or have they shared their own feelings of being quite drained mentally or physically? If they feel it, and if we feel it, the reality is our people also feel the same as well. So this is not something that is only unique to us, but definitely impacting the working population that we're looking at here across Asia. And when it comes to productivity, we've already covered that, but the number and percentage says that mental health is negatively impacting the productivity at work is at 45%. Again, almost half the population. Now, last but not least, to that inference that I was referring to earlier on, where the scores were pretty low at that 40s, where the rest of the world was 60 plus, we look at things like stigma. 54% of the employees based here in Asia believe that their career options would be limited if their employer knew they had a mental health issue. Now, imagine I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed right now, or work is getting not manageable, or for whatever reason, I realize I need to be diagnosed with adult ADHD, or maybe something else, something more extreme, to even things like what I mentioned earlier on anxiety and burnout and workload being too heavy. Here in Asia, we worry about bringing this up to our line managers or the organization, because we fear for our job, because potentially the culture and the society within the country that we are in or in the organization we are in are not helping to build that culture of change and openness to discuss the mental health challenges that we may face and we are facing in the workplace anywhere in the world. Now, I'm going to stop the presentation here because this is just giving us a bit of a quick conversation on this. I hope this has been really useful and something that you can take back to your organizations. And if you are keen to get to know more about the mental health index, here's a QR code where you can download the Singapore version of the report as a starting point. For those who are interested in the wider Asia report that I just went through early on, please drop me an email. I'll be more than happy to share that with you. You can get that, and at the right time, you feel that you want to go through any of those information, either for Singapore or the region, feel free to reach out, and we will get myself or the right team to support you accordingly, regardless of where you are based in the world and overlooking the population in Asia when it comes to employee well-being and mental health. Thank you, everyone, for your time. It's been a great pleasure and an honor. And back to you, team.